Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed the conference so far. I've certainly found it a fascinating and stimulating time. My name is Dr. Patrick Dixon. I'm often described as a futurist. We're all futurists. All of us are involved in thinking about tomorrow. That's what we do. We read the newspapers simply to give us insight into what tomorrow's headlines will be. And as we consider the future, I want to turn a page from yesterday with our thoughts about the current crisis to tomorrow, and in particular to the theme of this forum next year, which will be, of course, innovation. And I just have a couple of remarks I want to make before we get on with the rest of the morning's program looking at innovation. One of the things that's quite clear is that we are living in increasingly joined up times in terms of globalization, and that, of course, is a fundamental reason why we had this current crisis, because of our world being so joined up. I often talk about wildcards, low probability, but potentially high impact events that come crashing into strategy. Wildcards are 1% or less likely to happen in any year. But as DHL knows, as Neptune Shipping knows, as every government minister here knows, if you have 400 or 500 potential wild cards that are operating in our global environment, then the risk of one or two of those going off in any year becomes very high. And I'll give you an example of one wild card which nearly cancelled this whole event, which of course is swine flu. I was sitting with someone from Mexico just 2 nights ago. The fact is that we have twice as many cases worldwide of swine flu already than we had of SARS in 2003. The only difference is, fortunately, it now seems that hardly anyone is dying of swine flu, so we are becoming more relaxed about it. But SARS produced 8,600 sick people in 12 to 16 weeks. 10% of them died. 862 died. And if we have now seen twice as many cases of swine flu that we did of SARS, and if we had seen anything like that death toll this time around, then this conference, I'm sure, would not have happened. The risk would have been too great. So it's just an example of another wild card operating in our complex environment. And we heard yesterday about the $3 trillion of stimulus investment, and the ministers have been hearing about it again this morning in an advisory breakfast. And I'm interested to know your view. I'm doing a global survey, an informal one, about the perspectives of leaders on the recovery time. And just to say a welcome to you who are watching this online with the web broadcast all across the world. We welcome you here to Leipzig, but you won't see any images for the next minute or two. The camera will be on me, not on you, but I wonder if you could indicate to me when you think it's possible recovery might come. And I'm going to ask my first question, so put your hands up if you think we could see significant recovery in some parts of the world within 4 years. Within 4 years. Put your hands up if you think that's true. Within 4 years, you could think okay, thank you. Put your hands up if you think it's quite likely that we will see strong recovery in some parts of the world within 36 months. Put your hands up if you think that's true. Put your hands up if you think it could actually happen within 24 months. Now, just to reflect back what I have seen, it shows that almost everyone here believes that we should be planning for recovery within 48 months. Most of you think within 36 months. The thing that is really striking, shocking to me, is that to take us back 12 months ago, and I'm looking for Jack, 12 months ago, the theme was environment, climate change, and the talk was all of massive oil price hikes And how would the industry survive? We were hit last May by a spike of $147 per barrel of oil. And of course, that focused us on climate change simply as a business opportunity as well as a moral duty, because many of the transport innovations we were talking about last year would pay for themselves out of energy reduction and climate change policy. Now, here we are at the opposite end of global chaos, having experienced an oil price less than $35 a barrel, now back up at around 60. Where does it go next? I want to suggest to you that most of the economic stimulus impact will only start to hit when recovery is already starting. I'll give you an example in transport. I know many of you are involved in new stimulus programs for transport. But I also know how long it takes to build a high-speed railway, 10, 12 years. I know how long it takes to build a new berth for a shipping port, 10 years. I know how long it takes to build a new runway in an airport, much longer than we ever think of because of planning rules and everything else. So it's clear to me that we are going to see an aftershock in terms of stimulation, and this $3 trillion of global spend is likely to push us beyond recession and into something quite sharp the other side. Just one final question I want to ask you. Put your hands up if you think, as a result of stimulus and all the investment programs, that when recovery does come in 2, 3, or 4 years' time, you think it may actually continue so strongly that we have the highest inflation in your nation for more than 6, 7, or 8 years. Put your hands up if you think higher inflation is a real likelihood as a result of what's happening. What I'm saying is this: we need to plan long term, we need to plan strategically, and we have to plan in an integrated way, recognizing the idea of separating energy industry from transport industry is absolutely last century. If we've heard one thing over and over again, it is that the future of energy is tied to the future of transport. It affects the energy prices, but also, most importantly, many of the innovations we are dreaming of will depend on alternative energy production in the future. And of course, I'm thinking of things like electric cars. There is a fundamental ticking clock that is working away, and that, of course, is nothing to do with innovation, nor technology, nor oil price, nor environment. It is demographics. And the fact that there are 1 billion children alive today, all of whom will be adults and wanting to be mobile within 15 to 20 years. And that alone is driving the urbanization. That alone is a significant driver of urbanization. I'm so delighted that we have a delegation here from China, where the government is planning or expecting 300 million people to move from rural areas into cities by 2020. That alone will drive one of the greatest investments in transport infrastructure that our world has ever seen. And when we combine this demographic push with the economic stimulus that developed nations are pushing in themselves into transport infrastructure, then I would say that we are in for some very exciting futures regarding new technology, innovation, and just about everything else. So with that, I would like to welcome back onto the platform, Mr. Yıldırım, the president of the forum from Turkey, and also Rob Merrifield, who is the Minister of State for the Ministry of Transport in Canada. Rob Merrifield, as you know, is taking over the presidency from June, and both of them will now bring some brief reflections on the private ministerial meeting that took place between 5 and 7 o'clock last night on the future of transport. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. We are the almost end of ITF Forum. And I would like to first thank you all for joining year 2009 International Transport Forum under presidency of Turkey. I am also very pleased to hear as a chair of this year's International Transport Forum and to present the views of ministers to you. In setting up this forum, ministers and all other participants underlined the importance of transport for world economies and societies. And we wanted to ensure that the crucial strategic issues that concern our sector are discussed and debated by all players in and around the sector. Transport policy is a wide area, and we need a broader understanding of our aim and challenges. So far, we are very delighted that the ITF is beginning to help this occur. We have seen in the last few days a rich and varied set of ideas that will give us all food for thought and action in the future. And we thank you all from the private sector, from international bodies, and from research communities for your input and ideas. Ministers retain and intend to continue to have a key role in this forum. I am very pleased that so many ministers, deputy ministers, attended and took part in the discussion this year's event. We are also pleased that India has joined and China attended at a high level. The forum is on the way to becoming truly global. Yesterday, the ministers discuss how we see the crisis and the ways out of it. It is certain that our sector has been badly hit, and we greatly regret the loss of jobs and closure of firms that is happening in many of our countries. And we are doing all we can do to minimize the social effect and to stimulate and grow our economies. But it came out strongly in our discussion that we need to look beyond the crisis and prepare the sector for the future. The importance of transport is not diminished by this crisis. If anything, it is increased. Our statement has been made available to you all. In it, we lay the accent on some high-level policy principles, which I hope will be supported by everyone. This includes emphasizing the fundamental importance of efficient transport systems and sound investments, open markets, environmental and social issues, funding for transport, and reliable and secure supply chains. The Secretariat will also deliver a paper with more details on these points and specific challenges to you all. There is also a rich set of papers and ideas developed for the forum that can support the debate and discussion here. Now, the political challenge for us as administrators is to live up these principles and implement them if we want to see the agenda moving forward and the many challenges tackled in a concrete way. It's clear that international cooperation and coordination absolutely needs to be strengthened at this time. This is easy to say, but we need to be clear on how to do it. We are determined that International Transport Forum plays a central role in global transport policy formulation. I look forward to the discussion this morning as it concerns exactly that issue, how to carry forward the ambitious aims we have for the sector, including being clear on who will do what. I would like to once again thank you for participation in our forum and for your support during Turkish presidency. I look forward to see you all the International Transport Forum in Leipzig next year under the presidency of Canada, where we will focus on innovation. I would like to first and foremost thank you. Now he's coming back in the front. Okay, this is an official speech which I completed. Now it is time to say a few things about my feeling about this conference. Now this is the last day of the conference. We had workshops, panels, and ministerial session, and some exhibition activities. So as an overall evaluation, I can share with you the subject for this year, transport for global economy, challenges, opportunities in downturn, is very much important because of the situation which we face globally. Since the global trade decreased because of financial difficulties, the trust in the financial market now is badly damaged. Trade financing is not able to anyone. So if there is no finance, which means there is no trade. International Chamber of Shipping knows very well what it means. Once you don't have international trade, then what to do with big-sized container vessels? Just 1 year ago, the people from shipping sector was complaining that the growth in sea transportation is about 20% per annum. So infrastructure, especially developed country, is so slow and is not able to meet the demand for the years coming. Not so longer, 9 months after today, we have a 20% drop in transportation with these container vessels. So you can see how drastic change within a short period of time. So this is, the situation is severe. We should be aware of that. We have not only transportation sector, all sectors, more or less, very much affected by the financial crisis. But the sudden and severe effect on transport, because the transport and trade goes together. If there is no trade, there is no transport. So in this hard time, what we need is to cooperate internationally. We concentrate on infrastructure improvement, which is necessary after crisis ending, and also necessary for competitive transportation. So there are stimulus packages in different sectors. Government is announcing how they support the various sectors to overcome effect of crisis. But I think is that the clever decision is to support infrastructure development. Just because of this sector has no require any demand, immediate demand. If you support automotive industry, if you support other production sector, you may face marketing problem. Since the global trade is not recovered, so you will have an additional cost for stock. So it is the clever to concentrate on infrastructure improvement for creating job, as well as domestic market will come alive. So once again, thank you very much for everybody participating and sharing your view in this important forum. And of course, this forum was not be possible if ITF and Mr. Jack Short, his team, and my staff from Ministry of Transportation, they work hand in hand during 1 year in different place and level to make this conference, this forum, successful one. Thank you very much for your attention.
I have just a couple of quick words to add to that. Actually, when we look at what we do in transport, it's everything from walking to biking to scootering to cars to train and plane and everything in between. It's amazing. We do it all together. It's one thing that we've learned over this last year is just how connected we are, more so than ever before. Last year at this conference, you were talking about another crisis. It's a crisis of high energy costs. And you looked at opportunities in that crisis, and that was very good. Now we're looking at challenges and opportunities in a downturn and an economic recession, and we're looking for opportunities in that. I would suggest to you next year we're going to be talking about innovation, and we're going to be looking at opportunities in that. And that's what is exciting about a session like this. We come together not only to talk about our challenges and problems, but also the opportunities, and we share together. Not only are we sharing the ideas together, we're building relationships between each other. Because in government, you soon learn that an idea is just an idea. You come across those on a daily basis, many of those ideas. Really, to move from an idea to implementation takes consensus build, and that only happens through relationships. And as we get to know each other, understand each other, we We then form bonds that be able to move forward together. And if it's one thing that this last year should have taught us, is that we are so connected as a world that we absolutely must work together and move forward together. That is absolutely critical. I heard a lot yesterday about protectionism. If it's one thing that we need to do is protect ourselves from protectionism. And I would encourage us all to do that. And, we all commit to it. I wonder if next year we're going to be able to be standing in this forum and saying that we've put feet to those words and actually are going to implement that. I hope that's one of the things that we take from this conference, that we actually go back and reinforce, re-solidify our commitment to make sure that happens. I hope we go back and also deal with our bureaucracies within our countries, push those back, remove the red tape, and move into the stimulus funding that we've talked about so much yesterday, so that it actually gets out, that it doesn't impact us after the recession is over, but it actually drives us through it and drives the innovation to allow us to be able to succeed. My message to you would be seize the day, take the opportunities that are here today, because they're great and there's a wonderful opportunity in it. I guess when you see a recession coming, the best advice I can give you would be just don't participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What we're going to do now, we're going to move on to the first of two panels. They're both forward-thinking panels. The first one will be before coffee, the second one after. And I'm going to introduce four individuals, and then I'd like you to welcome them all together at the same time. The first we're delighted to have is Matthias Reuti, who is the Director General for the European Commission of the DGTREN. The second is Jamal Sagir, who is the Director of Energy, Transport and Water for the World Bank. I'm interested in the title, Energy, Transport, Water. I do think this is a sign of the future, but I gather the World Bank is going to split these briefs, which is perhaps a bit last century, but never mind. And Ron Widows, I'd like to welcome as well. He's the CEO of Neptune Orient Lines, which is a huge fleet, of which I think probably he'll tell us about 6% are laid up at the moment. And finally, Scott Price, CEO of DHL Express Europe. Would you give them all a round of applause? Welcome, please. Thank you. As Scott, I was utterly fascinated and astonished to have the privilege of watching your 4.5 kilometers of conveyor belt shifting 100,000 items during part of the night before last. An astonishing achievement. And just remind us how recently that facility opened.
It actually opened in May of last year. So, in fact, last year at the first forum, we had our first tour of this esteemed group, and we had a number of sort of fake boxes going through, so it didn't look empty. But we began a transition process and have now completely moved all of our aircraft. So we have our entire European operations moving in and out of Leipzig every night.
So 50 planes now come in here rather than into Brussels.
Brussels, that's right.
And
someone sitting next to me who has a house near the Brussels airport thanked me quite effusively.
If you ever have the opportunity to see this, it will change you. There is no video that can ever capture the totality of what is happening in that space. Can I ask a rude question and ask how much the move cost you? Roughly? Yes.
I'm looking to see if I'm allowed to say anything, right? No.
Okay.
No, I think formally we announced that it was an investment of about 300 million euros.
And what do you think the payback time would be? Because it's an expensive move. You had a very good infrastructure in Brussels already.
12 months ago, faster than what I think it is now. But I believe that probably we've added one more year to the slowdown. Quite honestly, with the move eastward of what we see to be the European continent economy towards Central and Eastern Europe, it'll probably be a little bit later before it well balances, but we see huge growth in volume coming out of Eastern Europe. And now that we've tested oil at $140 a barrel, when manufacturing comes back, in terms of capacity investments. We're seeing in particular the consumer electronics and low capital intensive industries saying that the wage arbitrage along the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta in the south in China is no longer significant enough to offset the risk of oil at 120, 130. So we see a lot of capital investment of capacity for Western European consumption coming back into Central Europe. So it was a good bet.
And that's the reason for moving your hub
eastward, yes.
Well, how many miles further east? I was a long way east.
Several hundred kilometers. Nearly probably 800 kilometers.
Thank you. Matthias, with an EU hat on, I know that you are really excited about the impact of smart technologies, really going digital completely in terms of new innovation. I wondered if you could paint us a picture of some of the things that you're hoping to see in the next 10 years.
Well, I would like to perhaps have a slightly longer perspective than 10 years, because I think we all know in the transport sector that when we talk about 10 years, we talk about today. In reality, what we need to think about is, if we want to think about the future of transport, we need to think in terms of 2030, 2050. And if we think in terms of 2030, 2050, and we look at the major challenges that we're facing, and you've mentioned them: demography, climate change, energy prices, but also perhaps oil peak. We will have to accommodate to a totally different transport world in the future. And this will be a transport world which, to my mind, will be clearly dominated also by a clear break in the way we have been dealing with transport at the moment. So one of the things which will clearly be happening is that we will have to be looking for an alternative fuel to oil. Will it be biofuels, second generation, third generation biofuels for airplanes? Will it be electricity? Will it be hydrogen? It's very difficult to say yet, but at the moment everybody would say, in terms of cars, we're moving towards electricity. If it's electricity, will we move very quickly towards CO2-free city logistics? Do we go back to the milk cart that we all know from the 50s?
So this is powered by what? Nuclear?
Electricity. And the power then has to be generated by nuclear, by renewables, and by perhaps coal and gas using carbon capture and storage. But for that, you also need different types of grids.
So your vision is of a zero-emission urban environment. Would that be true?
In the long term, yes. I'm not quite sure how fast we will go there, but we will get to the zero-emission houses. We will get probably to zero-emission transport in an urban environment. We will get to zero-emission electricity production. Is it by 2050? Is it by 2060? I don't know. But for that, we need a totally different intelligent infrastructure, smart grids, smart metering. Just to give you an example, if we move towards electricity, we can probably, by storing electricity in the car, actually solve the storage problem for renewables. For instance, you take your electric car, you drive to your office or wherever you go to, you have programmed that you're only going to use your car in the afternoon at 5 o'clock and you get a good tariff. Then the electricity company, actually rather than loading the car which you have plugged in, will actually steal or take away the electricity which is left over and use it for cooking or for air conditioning. But you will have the guarantee that by 5 o'clock their battery is filled up again. It'll be a totally different world that we're moving to, and we have to think about that.
Thank you, Matthias. Ron Widows, with your experience of running the Neptune fleet, we were talking yesterday about the fact that even if the land is there from previous dredging around the edge of an existing port, it still takes 10 whole years to build a single new berth. Can this process be speeded up in terms of infrastructure development? Because if not, it's surely going to miss out on stimulus packages.
Yes, of course, the example I gave you yesterday was maybe one of the more extreme ones, but not unlike developing a new terminal on the Thames, London Gateway. That project has been underway for how long? Long time. Years. A long time. So the time but cycle times to be able to do these things are longer in different parts of the world. Obviously, in some of the less developed parts of the world, that can happen a lot quicker. But at the same time, maybe the diligence around environmental concerns is not quite the same. So one of the challenges for government, industry obviously affected, is how do you develop regulations and laws that ensure that you're doing the right things, you're doing diligence relative to environmental protection, but, you know, get an environmental impact study in a year as opposed to 3. You know, be able to bring to bear the stimulus, the money that's being made available, that's available now, but do that at a point in time where you actually can create jobs in a significant way. You think about this on a global scale. It certainly is more of an issue in places like the United States or in the EU, where the environmental regulations are maybe more of a challenge. How to do, right? I mean, how to do that right, but be able to begin spending and creating jobs, which would be millions of jobs, but do that in a time frame that doesn't take you the next 4 or 5 years to be able to actually bring that to bear. Can be done.
Thank you. Jamal, a perspective from the World Bank in terms of integration and getting our act together?
I've been carefully listening to the discussion for the last 2 days. First, I would like to congratulate you. This is a very important theme. Now, when we look from the World Bank, or I look at it as an economist, there are 3 factors that have, in the last 2 centuries, helped us a lot. Growing cities, mobile people, and vigorous trade. And these have been the catalyst for progress and welfare. These will remain the same ingredient for the future, and we have to keep this in mind. We cannot just pay off this aspect. Now, if we look at what's been happening in reality, transport costs for the last 50 years have been falling by enormously. Just since 1970, freight costs have been getting by 50%, transport costs in general 40%. You would have expected with such costs a change in the geography and the way trade has been operated. But in reality, what's been happening is concentration has becoming the geography which matters in development and in economic development. In other words, if you look at Poland right now, 5% of the density areas of Poland produce 40% of GDP. Cairo, Greater Cairo produce 40% of the GDP of Egypt. So the economic concentration, economic geography matters. In that context, when you think about the location, look about the transport has to adapt to this reality. The geography has been changing. And when we look at the financial crisis right now and what's happening, it's given us another opportunity to look at it. Another aspect that will make it even more difficult in the adaptation or in the thinking, this transport sector, and as you said, I manage also the energy sector of the World Bank. The energy sector has been on the front line in terms of the climate change agenda. It had been put on the spotlight. It emit 24% of CO2. Transport emit 20% of CO2. So far, transport has been low-key. Sometimes I say it's missing in action, and it's waiting for something to happen. But something will happen very simply. If the transport sector doesn't drive the climate change agenda, it's going to be the energy agenda that will drive the transport climate change agenda. Therefore, we have to start thinking about not only innovation, not only R&D, about how you leapfrog technology. I didn't hear the word here in the last 2 days of leapfrogging. We cannot simply wait in the valley of death that we product in the technology of transport that will take 15 years to develop. It has to become 10 years. Yesterday, I checked a little bit some figures about R&D. DHL invests, if I understand well, and you correct me, around 4% of their revenue in R&D. That's what I was told. This is good. This is better with the energy sector, which usually they invest around 1%. But it's not sufficient for leapfrogging. The pharmaceutical sector invests around 10%, IT around 15%, and that's where they were able to reduce the valley of death and go quicker and getting product on the market from design to operation in 5 years.
But it depends, doesn't it, on the energy price? Because if we had an energy price which goes back up to $140 a barrel and stays 140, 150 for the next 5 years, we're not going to need too much government regulation to try and force us to change. Change is going to happen quickly, won't it, Scott?
Yes. You know, I also believe we have to stop blaming the thermometer for the temperature, right? You know, We move things from point A to point B. And yes, we are a large carbon footprint. But you know, I'm a great believer in free markets that are properly regulated. The latter being an important point here. And it's the responsibility of governments to properly regulate, which is the balance between penalty and promotion. And if I look at the current regulatory environment in which we try to deal in an international context, the regulations is a huge driver of this CO2 problem. 30% of trucks run empty in Europe. Why? Because of cabotage. So the regulation could overnight reduce carbon by 30%. We could invest 10%. 4% is actually quite healthy for a major corporation. 10% of an R&D. We could invest in a completely new fleet overnight. We wouldn't even come close to that 30% reduction. So I think it needs to work hand in hand. The industry must operate with governments who work together. We have to have consistency as we cross borders in the environment in which we try and operate, and that regulatory environment must be properly focused on removing the obstacles while industry also invests to also reduce their carbon footprint. You can't just blame the thermometer.
I'm interested you talk about this issue of empty trucks in Europe. I did some work with the European Petrochemical Association, looking at identical chemical product that was passing, two trucks passing each other on the same motorway, going in different directions, carrying the same product from two factories at different parts of Europe to two depots in different parts of Europe. And I calculated that if we had a simple product exchange that really worked, we could take 100,000, it was 100,000 kilometers per year off the road straight away, and possibly a whole load more. I mean, it could be even several million in some cases. Very small innovations which cost almost nothing. The cost of doing that would have been 100,000 euros per year to run such a product exchange. And it seems to me there are all kinds of opportunities for further economies. I mean, you've got planes at the moment going out to Shanghai from Frankfurt or even from Leipzig that are going out empty, coming back, not empty, but
yeah.
with less, with more capacity in them than coming the other way.
Correct? No, I think, you know, it's important to correct. We have used this downturn, and I guess, you know, opportunities in a downturn. We have used this downturn to upgrade our fleet. So we have reduced the number of aircraft that we're flying. We have upgraded them into more fuel efficient, obviously a much better carbon footprint, and our utilization rates today in terms of capacity are significantly better than they were 12 or 14 months ago. So there are ways to operate around this. You know, ultimately, you know, altruistic as one would want to be, the ultimate driver day in and day out is our customers want their transport at a cost per kilo cheaper than what it used to be. So we have engineers who constantly look at these product exchange. I mean, we're constantly looking for ways to reduce the cost through greater efficiency. I think, as I said, regulatory environment has a very important part to play in that, in both promoting and penalizing the behavior. We all suffer today from what happens when you don't properly regulate an industry, and what that did to the credit markets. And so we completely support the regulatory need. It's just not done very well today.
Thank you. Matthias, you described smart technologies. You were talking about the e-cars, the potential for a carbon-free urban centre. Are there other technologies that excite you when you talk to your children or your grandchildren about the future of transport?
Very clearly so. I think we are, in the context of the European Union, thinking of a number of other IT systems. Let's start off with one which is actually being deployed at the moment, which is the European Rail Traffic Management System, which will allow us to make much better use of the overall infrastructure, rail infrastructure that we have in Europe, because building new rail lines is horribly expensive. Reducing times between trains is it's much better, and we're wheeling this out. This is also an expensive technology. What will be probably even much more important is to have an integrated logistic systems for rail, but not only for rail, but which will actually also talk with the cars, with the trucks, and the planes to a certain extent. And I think we need to move into that direction to move towards this integrated
I'm interested
system.
you mentioned that. I know, Ron, you've got strong views about intermodal corridors. Can you just remind us what they are and why they're so important to your industry of shipping?
Sure. Talking maybe a little more broadly, my other day job is I chair the World Shipping Council, so I want to get back to the regulatory question as well. But intermodal corridors, there's been some, the opportunities for improving efficiency and having an impact on congestion, huge environmental benefits. The best example of that that we see is a project that was done in LA Long Beach, the Alameda Corridor, which actually separated truck and rail over a 20-mile corridor through the main metropolitan area of Los Angeles to open up flow. That same kind of intermodal flow capability could improve congestion, improve efficiency, transit times materially in a number of places, certainly in the US. But when you think about urbanization and the fact that many of the major metropolitan areas in the world, left to their own devices, are going to become congested materially greater over time, how do you get goods movement separated from the movement of people in a way that makes continued access to those urban areas efficient? If not, you have to begin to change your whole distribution patterns. Where distribution centers are has to move because you can no longer get in and out of these places.
So just to make sure I understand this right, for historical reasons, we've seen large urban populations, dense populations grow up around ports. And this has been a stranglehold on, on getting fast-track flow of containers on and off ships and out into the rest of the country.
It certainly has been. And in the U.S., where trains are operated that are nearly 2 miles long, a 2-mile-long train going through a city at grade causes
Paralysis.
Obvious problems.
Yeah.
As the volumes have grown, that problem has gotten progressively greater. Now, in Europe, train sizes are smaller.
Yep.
The infrastructure is different, but over time you have the same kind of dynamic develop.
Jamal, these kind of projects are very expensive. Financing is a real issue. I know that you're passionate about that. Can you tell us a little bit? You mentioned something yesterday to me about Egypt and the fact that such a large chunk of the economy comes from a city like Cairo. Can you just talk us through the ways in which the World Bank is looking to finance these kinds of large infrastructure projects?
Yes. First, we are extremely concerned that this year the net private capital flows will decline by around $700 billion in infrastructure finance. And this is very serious. This has changed completely the role of the game. It's not, but what we have been doing right now is how you rebuild confidence by not only working on the private sector, but working on the private sector as well in the regulatory framework. Because basically the deal is broke. And when we talk about the private-public partnership, actually the partnership, the P which is in between the two, is not working either. So at this stage, for instance, from the IFC perspective, which is the private sector of the arm of the World Bank, we are stepping in some specific deal to help them finance some of the debt so that they can take it, and we give really concessional loans to help them finance their debt so that they continue. On the other hand, from the IBRD or the World Bank, we are also financing some of the public part of the story. What we are extremely concerned in this crisis is not only this big project. We are concerned of the simple project of maintenance. What we have seen happening in this financial crisis is maintenance of road fund, as well as rail maintenance, are simply not coming anymore. Ministry of Finance in many developing countries and emerging markets are not putting the fund needed for maintenance. And this is ticking bomb, and we are extremely concerned that when the crisis will finish, we're going to find the cost of rehabilitation will be more expensive than the cost of maintaining the assets. In terms of new project, I think it's very important what we are financing. We are putting some facilities to help preparing this project, because what we are also concerned that when the crisis will finish, we're not going to have enough project to finance. And that's another activities we are working with. From the big project, I think what we are, whatever from the Egyptian context or the Asian context, I think it's important to think big project. We'll see in the future much bigger project than we have seen in the past, but we've seen much more also focused projects. And that's where we're going to be much, and the World Bank will be going. We are among the biggest financiers in the transport sector. We put around $7 billion of financing per year. It's not big enough, but I think we are playing a catalytic role.
Scott, as a free marketeer, are you worried about selective investment in some parts of infrastructure? I mean, I don't see investment in infrastructure that would necessarily help you unless it's trucks on the road, or am I wrong? I mean, you've got a station waiting to be used in Leipzig Airport, I think, to connect you to Frankfurt and to replace flights. I guess you are interested in this kind of thing as well.
Yes, again, we will go wherever we're able to bring to our customers who manage supply chains a cheaper option. And I think this idea that, the logistics industry is somehow responsible for the carbon, it'd be like me going to my customer and saying, well, I'm not going to pick up your boxes because, frankly, you're carbon inefficient. I mean, what are we supposed to do, right? I mean, so the ultimate start of the flaw is in the design of supply chains, and those supply chains get designed because they're chasing the lowest cost option, the balance of labor, the balance of production efficiency, the balance of working capital, the balance of transport, et cetera. And 10 years ago, when oil was consistently stable at roughly $20 to $25, the cost of logistics didn't even play into it. Now that we've tested this 140 a barrel, there are a number of major corporations and major industries with a 10-year foresight who are saying, well, what is going to be the supply chain of the future? And what we need is governments and we need industries to come together and say, 10 years from now, this is the footprint that we want to arrive on rail in Europe. This is the footprint that we want to arrive on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We absolutely would work towards utilizing that if we see it as not only cost efficient, but the right thing to do for the environment. But we're waiting for someone to do it. We can't do it. A single company can't do it. A single industry can't do it.
Can a simple government do these things, or does it require joined up European-wide planning? Matthias?
Well, asking the question to somebody from the European Commission is provoking the answer. I think essentially we need to think about transport infrastructure in the next few years on a European-wide level, and we need to join it up with our transport policy. We cannot have infrastructure development separated from our overall transport policy. And I think the debate that we have launched just about 6 months ago, and which we will continue to have for the next 12 months on the level of the European Union, is to move towards this joined-up thinking on the European Union level. This will then be half a continent of some 500 million people, but we need to think transport infrastructure and logistics together. I think that's very clear now.
Thank you. One final question I have for Ronald, while you're here, representing a buyer of ships, which you are, as you look out to the kind of products that you're being offered, the new technologies that shipbuilding companies are beginning to talk about, where do you think ship design will be maybe in another 10 or 15 years' time? Will we see a significant change in the shape of hulls or engine efficiency? What do you see?
Well, there will be changes. The regulatory question is really material. We're going to deliver as an industry in the next 3 years about 50, almost 60% of the world fleet will be delivered again in that period of time.
Sorry, say that to me slowly.
50, 60% of the existing world fleet will come, that much tonnage will come in the next 3 years. So,
3 years?
Yes.
50% of the world's tonnage?
That's part of the problem we have, obviously.
But in 3 years.
Good news, bad news. The good news is that a lot of that tonnage, the ships are more fuel efficient than ships that were built 5, 10 years ago. The bad news is that given where environmental, regulatory, and standards setting is heading, those ships are not nearly as efficient as they will need to be able to really contribute materially to a reduction in terms of environmental impact. So you're talking about a need to change that entire fleet again over the next couple of decades. So before our industry invests the next $1 trillion, which is what you're talking about, in excess of $1 trillion investment, you really do need to have some clarity of where regulatory and standard setting is heading. So the engagement of industry with government, very critical. I think the good news is that's happening to a greater degree today than it ever has before. But getting to those answers fairly quickly then gets you down the road because that investment is massive, right? Huge investment. at which today, of course, there is no investment available. There is no financing available for ship finance today. Not one, nothing. So we have still some ways to go.
Okay, one brief comment responding to that from Matthias, then we need to go to coffee.
Just a quick question which I think we all need to reflect upon. Providing a stable regulatory environment means, to a certain extent, setting standards, setting norms, to a certain extent, setting upper limits in terms of consumption, efficiency, and all the rest. There's another way to do it, which is a market-based way, which is by having a carbon cap and trading mechanism. That obviously is a much better way in terms of regulating because it's market-based, but at the same time it gives you the same unpredictability as the oil price as such. And that's a difficulty that I think we need to discuss. How much regulation in terms of interventionist regulation, in terms of efficiency standards, and how much market-based regulation we need.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to thank Ronald Widows, Jamal Sagir, Scott Price, and Matthias Thureti. Thank you very much for a most interesting discussion. Thank you. We now have a coffee break, which will be the length as stated, which is half an hour. So if you could look at your watches now. But we will start absolutely on time because we've got a very, very important panel. It's the last hour or so of our entire time together. And we will have the industry associations, and we will be talking specifically about new innovation, radical innovation in aviation, in shipping, in road haulage, in urban infrastructure, in rail. So see you back in 30 minutes. Thank you.